Hello friends, welcome back. Now let's figure out how we can use or leverage the calculate function to classify our sales in high sales, medium sales and low sales. To do that, we also need to apply the count rows function. So my idea here is if we go to our sales table, this one here, and first select it of course, the sales table, this one, and maybe remove the filter for now. So clear our filters. We can see that in total we got 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 entries, okay? So basically we got 9 sales of our products. So let's actually figuring out how many, amount, in this case rows, do apply or belong to which product. We can easily do this by a simple formula, which is the count rows function. So let me show this to you. I right click on my sales table. I say I'd like to create a new measure in here. And then I go in here and say this will be, in this case, simply the count of sales. Count sales is equal to, and I only want to use the count rows function here. And it tells you what it does. It counts the number of rows in a table. That's all what it does. So if we put it in here and referring to a table, in this case, our sales table here. So we are done. We're good to go. I can press enter. And then this will simply count up all the sales we have. So we can easily check this. If I go to a card visual, tick this option and put in the count of sales, we see that we got count of sales 9, which we would expect because we got 9 entries in the sales table, right? So far so good. Now let me just make a little bit more space here. Let me make this smaller here so we can have a little bit more space in here, okay? And let's also make this smaller in here. Just a second, okay. So by default in a card visual, we don't have any context, no filter. So that is why we can see the total amount, which is 9. If we would use the measure we have created, the count of sales, in the table, then we would have a filter context in here, which are these product names. So we can tick this option here, go to count sales, and then we see 3, 2, 2, 2. And basically in total, we see 9 entries because we got 9 rows, okay? And that is true. So we see that for Monster Energy, we got 3 entries in the sales table. And just a quick check, Monster Energy is the ID number 1. So if I go to data and take a look, there's a 1 here, there's a 1 here, and there's a 1 here. So we got 3 entries. And for all the other products, there are 2. So that's totally fine. And that works. We can see the data, the correct amount of rows of sales we have created here. So far so good. But what if we would like to create an additional table for the classification? As I said at the beginning, what are the sales which we would consider as, in this case, high sales, the medium sales, and let's say the low sales, those 3 criteria, which we can simply specify or define if we set a table and set certain kinds of conditions. So let's say all sales between 0 and 10 are actually low sales, sales between 10 and 20 are medium sales, and all sales with amounts greater than 20 would be considered as high sales, just as an example. So in order to do this, we at first need to create a table because currently we don't have low, medium, and high. To do that, I will go to insert here and, to home here. And under home, there's an option to enter data. Now, in the past, we have used under the modeling section, the option to create a new table from here. The difference is that this new table here is referring to a DAX expression, which we need to create in order to create the table, like we have done, for instance, with the values function. The home, on the other hand, so enter data here, is referring to manually enter data. And that's what I want to do here. So I can press enter data here, this option. And then there's our table. We can specify here the column name. So this could be, for instance, the classification here. And then I simply type in here, this will be low. Then go in here and say medium. And then the last one would be high. And then, of course, we need to say set some thresholds, like let's say top and bottom. So let's start here, double click here. Let's say this is bottom, bottom. And then here we go into top, okay, top. And let's say for the bottom, for low, we start with 0 sales and the highest is 10. Then for medium, we can start with 10 here and then we go up to 20. And finally, for the high, we got with 20. And the top, you could say a really high number. In my case, I know I don't have sales in this dataset above 30, so I can set the top to 30. But if you don't know in advance, you could put in a really high number in here. Okay, so we have specified the classification table, and now of course we can simply name this table, right? Let's say for this name, we say sales classification, okay, like that. And then we can click on load, and then we are good to go. So if I click on load, we just need to wait a few seconds until this new table has been evaluated, and now it's been created, and the model checks whether there are dependencies it can create, and then the new table appears in here. There it is, sales classification table. And of course, if I go to the model view, if I take this option here, and sometimes it's a little bit hidden, so you need to either zoom out using the control and the mouse wheel, or you simply close the property window just to see that the table is appearing here. You see again that the sales classification table so far has no relationship to our original model, which is quite simple here, only those two tables, but it's important to understand that there is no relationship directly in here, okay, between those two. So that's fine. So let's go back to the report view here, and now let's actually visualize our sales classification table. So I can tick this option, and now if I go to the classification, tick this option here, we see our classification in here. And of course, I also want to make this bigger so you can see that better on your screens. So let me go to the value section here and choose just a bigger text size. Could be 15. So hopefully that's big enough for you. So you should see now high, low, and medium. And of course, you can sort this the way you want it. Also, you can add an additional sort column if you want, if you need this, and sort by this column, right? So just an example here, if I go to my specific table, let's go with the, where is it? The sales classification table I've created, and I want to keep this kind of sorting here. What I could do here is I could add an additional index table. I'll right click on table, and let's actually say I'd like to edit the query. And then I could say, okay, here's my query, and let's actually now add an index column here. So let's say add column, and say we'd like to add an index column, okay? So add index column from 0, from 1, doesn't matter. In this case, I tick from 0, so I got my index. What I want to name this is actually only sorting, okay? Sorting, here we go. And then I go to home and click close and apply. And then also I get my sorting column created in here. Just a second, and there it is, okay? So that's sometimes helpful because now I can actually select here one of my columns, like the classification, and then I have an option to sort by. And here I can choose a different column. Like for instance, my sorting column, I can tick this option. And as soon as I do this, if I go back to my report view here, now you see that low, medium, and high is correctly sorted. So sometimes if you don't get the sorting you want by using the normal sorting options, like clicking here, for instance, or on the visual itself, clicking here and choose sort. If this doesn't fit for you, then what you can always do is add an additional sorting column to your table, as we have done here with this one, and then you can sort a specific column by another column, okay? So that's the trick here, and we got our classification. But now let's go back to our original goal. We want to actually classify our sales, right? So if I tick now the count of sales which we have created, remember, if I take this option, what do you think what will happen in our table in here? So let's actually explore that. Let's tick this option, and you see we got 9 everywhere. So basically the 9, yes, 9 is correct. We got in total 9 sales, but of course we don't got 9 sales classified as low sales. 9 is medium and 9 is high. That's not true. So obviously this is not working. And why is that? Well, the answer to this is quite simple. Because remember, if we go back to the model view, we don't have any relation to our model. And as long as we don't have any relation specified, then of course, if we do not use any DAX measure, anything else, to create this relation, then we would see always the same value repeating, which is the total amount. But that's of course not what we want. We want to do the classification correctly, so we need to adjust this a little bit. So let me just right click on my sales table to create my new measure. I tick this option here, and here we go. There's our measure, and let's say this is the correct sales classification. Okay, so we got this one, and say is equal to, and I go to a new line, and I say I want to use the calculate function. So we're good to go. Calculate, and our measure will be the count of sales, which we have already created. This one here, count of sales. but now we need to evaluate it in a new filter context. So removing the default one we have and create a new one. And the new one will be created using the filter function. So we've used this already. Filter returns a table with a specific filter expression applied. So basically a filter table. So the table itself will be the sales table, not the sales classification, but the sales table itself, sales DBL. And then we want to make sure that from the sales table, the sales column, this specific column, should be greater, the space greater than the minimum of the counting table which we created. So our sales classification table, and there we had the bottom, right? So we're referring to the bottom of that. And then at the same time, that's why we use something we already know or familiar with, we double ampersand, because both criteria must be checked, must be valid, and must be true. So at the same time, the sales from the sales table, the same one here, is less or equal to the maximum. So maximum as an aggregation. And for the column, we're referring to the sales classification. And here we say the top, this one here, okay? And we can close the max. And then we need to also close the filter. And finally, we need to close the calculate function. And that's our expression here, right? So basically what we tell it here is we want to calculate the count of sales, but in a modified context. That's why we use the filter function here. And this filter function will evaluate the sales table. And this sales table will now be filtered down based on this criteria. So we want to make sure that the sales table, the sales number, is greater than the minimum of the classification table from the bottom column. And at the same time, it is less than the or equal to the maximum of the top. And this sales classification bottom and sales classification top, those two are available actually in our table here, because each of the classification modes, the low, medium, and high, have a bottom and a low attached to them. Okay, so that's why those values are available in this specific filter here, so in this visual. So let's actually press enter for now. And so we got this. And just by the way, if you want to filter this properly, of course, or actually format this properly, that's what I wanted to say, then of course feel free to use any kind of tool like DAX formatter, for instance, and so on. You can do that easily. So, okay, let's go back to the visual. Let's see whether this measure we have created here is really evaluating now properly. So let me just tick this box, tick it now, and we see we got 3, 4, and 2, which is in total 9, so that's correct. And we have our classification. And this time, as I said, we see the correct numbers in here. So we got 3 sales, which are, in this case, below the threshold, or let's say greater than the minimum, but less than the maximum threshold. So we got some medium, which are those, and high, which are those. So let's go back to the table. In this case, we set for the low, we set 0 to 10. So if we go to the sales table in here, we can see that we got 10 value in here, a 5 value in here, and a 10 value in here. And because we say less or equal to 10, all these should be classified as low. This means we have 3 entries in our total sales table here. And if you go back in here, we can see a 3 in here. And now we know this is evaluating correctly. The same is true for the other ones. If you want to check that, you can do that. Okay, so that's our formula. And that's how we can leverage the calculate function, in this case, to correctly classify our customers. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys.